While the newly invigorated Benowitz was busy talking to the aliens and flying his own reconnaissance missions over Dulce, the Air Force and the NSA carried on with business as usual. They had gotten tired of having to explain, or explain away, the lights that still hovered around Kirtland, so they apparently moved their base of operations elsewhere. Valdez later ventured his opinion that what Benowitz was tracking and filming over the Manzanos were surveillance drones. That's from Chapter 21, The Craft, in Project Beta, the story of Paul Benowitz's national security and the creation of a modern UFO myth by Greg Bishop. Very good book. I'm going to have him on Blog Talk Radio tonight, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Greg Bishop will talk about underground bases, Dulce, UFOs, etc., etc. Unless I die in the meantime, which I feel about half dead, so whatever it is that's going around, I hope that you don't get it, because it feels like someone beat the hell out of me with a club. Anyway, I wanted to take the opportunity to welcome you to another edition of the Stench of Truth, and I wanted to comment on what's going on in Wisconsin, and now apparently moving to Ohio, and hopefully spreading from there. This with public employees demonstrating against a direct attack on unions and negotiation for contracts in Wisconsin. And this is precisely what you would expect to see, based on the idea that somehow the budget deficits and the crises of the economy right now are to be laid at the footsteps of your average rank-and-file worker. And it is a total lie and a total myth, and it completely ignores the real issues and the real problems in an effort to try to scapegoat some group or some people for a larger problem that's being ignored. And as I've said before, the real problems here is that money and state finances are no different. The states have for years practiced this sort of competitiveness amongst themselves, which resulted in giving away huge tax breaks and tax incentives to lure businesses to come to them, which resulted in a huge loss of revenue for the states. And they also participated via the state pension funds and things of this nature in the gambling scheme that is Wall Street. So whenever the plants or whatever got the tax breaks and took advantage of them for however long they did, and then up and left a whole bunch of unemployed in their wake, the states were left holding the bag, as it were. But that didn't stop them from continuing to play this same sort of game. And rather than face the facts and go after the real targets, and that is banks, finance companies, and Wall Street, which have made a total mess of this entire country, from the municipalities all the way up to the federal government. So right-wing stiffs and anybody with this idea that somehow unions and workers are to blame, because when you blame unions, you're blaming workers. The workers are somehow to blame for the faults of the state and for the faults of the people who were put in charge of managing the budget and finances of the state. One thing you need to remember is that whenever a contract is negotiated, it's negotiated in good faith. That means that the person who is the employer and the person who is the employed, they are not forced to give something that they're not willing to give. They both come in, they negotiate, and they both equally agree on the terms of the contract. Now, to suddenly say that somehow, some way, unions and the workers in them made the government give them these so-called enormous benefits packages and salaries, which is a total piece of garbage too. Public sector employees are barely in the middle class when it comes to the class structure in this society today. And it's only when you compare them to minimum wage slaves that this system churns out by its very nature, based on the economic policies of the federal government with free trade and with no accountability and with Las Vegas style gambling in the stock market and with pension funds and with derivatives and, you know, this bailout mentality, that somehow these people somehow twisted somebody's arm and forced them to give them something or get something from a state that they couldn't afford to give them. It's total bullshit. And of course these people are just doing their jobs. The unions are doing the job of the workers. They go in, they negotiate something. They both agree. You can't come back later and say, you know what, I shouldn't have agreed to that. You agreed to it. That means you looked at the numbers, you decided that you could pay it, you decided it was a fair arrangement, and now they want to break that and they want to say that it's their fault. Remember, because you're a wage slave, you have been a victim of this entire economic collapse. What is your answer going to be? Are you going to say, I'm going to blame Joe Blow down the street because he's in a union and he makes $40,000 a year or $50,000 a year, which is barely middle class, probably cannot support his family on that, and his wife has to work, or maybe he has 2 jobs in order to make a living. I'm going to blame him rather than blaming the banks, the finance companies, the federal government, and the Federal Reserve for bailing out over and over again corporations, banks, Wall Street finance companies, and foreign banks. And you have the Federal Reserve itself, which is supposed to be for the betterment of the United States. It's supposed to be the central bank of the United States, who Ben Bernanke said before Congress, even after doling out over $12 trillion in no or low interest loans to thousands of companies and banks, that there is no relief in sight for the states. How can you justify this? So what is your answer going to be? Are you going to join the hordes of these people on the right who are trying to make it a class war between the poor and the middle class while ignoring this huge bulk of assets and money taken up by the wealthy and the elites? Don't fall for the trick. Don't fall for it. Put the blame where it needs to be. That's on the elites. That's on the rich. When I say rich, I'm not talking a couple $100,000 a year rich. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about super rich. Okay? Multi-millionaires, etc. Put the blame there. Don't blame Joe Blow down the street because he has a union contract. It's going to get you nowhere. Because if you're going to be squabbling amongst yourselves while a Wall Street firm is taking your pension money, your money out of your bank because your bank is going insolvent, and stripping you of your home and every other bit of assets you have, while you are squabbling with Joe Blow because he has a contract and he makes more money than you. Don't fall for it. I hope this spreads, and I hope more people get involved, and I hope they decide that enough is enough, and we are not going to be scapegoats for the predation of Wall Street and the economic collapse that they foisted on this country. So I say go for it, and I hope it spreads, and I hope it spreads over the entire country, because it can have an enormous impact, and I hope it does. Again, join me tonight, 7 to 9 p.m., Blog Talk Radio with Greg Bishop, author of Project Beta and The Excluded Middle magazine. You can also find him at excludedmiddle.com, and also UFOmystic.com, where he blogs. Okay, thank you, and